So today's objectives, we will define trauma. We will be utilizing the SAMHSA definition of trauma. We'll define trauma-informed approaches, understand how trauma affects the brain. We'll list adverse childhood experiences or ACEs. We'll talk about a shift in thinking and identifying practical ways to create a trauma-informed environment for our young people and adult populations. All right. So our goals are to establish and provide safety, what helps you feel safe. This may sound very simple, but it needs to be highlighted because without safety and security that is felt by our clients, no progress or therapeutic relationship can ever occur for them. The underlying fundamental question is what happened to you? Symptoms are adaptations to traumatic events, so we can utilize those to offer the best support to folks in our communities. And healing happens in the relationships that we create. So thinking about the relationships that we create, I do want to do a shout out to Brene Brown's Power of Empathy. You can view that on YouTube. A great way for us to become a trauma-informed community is to empower and grasp onto that empathy that is needed for folks that we serve. All right. So our definition that we will be utilizing again was created by SAMHSA. It's a framework for understanding trauma. And again, it was developed by SAMHSA, a group of researchers, practitioners, trauma survivors, and family members convened by SAMHSA. It's important because it creates a framework for understanding the complex nature of trauma. There are numerous different definitions of trauma, but for our purposes today, we have adapted and adopted this definition for this training. You can find additional information on trauma at samhsa.gov/trauma-violence for, again, additional information on trauma-informed care. I apologize. My slideshow is not progressing as quickly as I would like for it to do today, so I apologize for the delay. The focus on our events is going to place the cause of trauma in the environment, not in some deficit of the individual. This is what underlies the basic credo of trauma-informed approaches. It's not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. The focus on experience highlights the fact that not every child or adult will experience the same events as being traumatic. The identification of a broad range of potential effects reminds us that our response must be holistic. It's not enough to focus on the symptoms or the behaviors. Our goal is to support a child to learn and grow, or an adult to live a satisfying life. And I apologize, it's not wanting to move forward here for me. There we go. All right. So you'll notice some statements on my screen. These are statements that were found in a book that's nearly 25 years old from Judy Herman. It's titled Trauma in Recovery, and she created this book and published this book in 1992. The important thing to know on the statements that are listed here on the screen is that these still ring true currently. Traumatic events have potential to cause these reactions or responses from the individuals that we serve. Number 3 that's listed here on the screen is present in almost all traumatic situation. It's universal among the victims of trauma, that disrupting a sense of control, connection, and meaning. So we as a system and individuals volunteering in our community can help give folks that sense of control back. There we go. You'll notice on my screen that there are a wide range of events that could potentially cause trauma for an individual. Trauma can be caused by events that the individual does not remember, such as events that occurred in early childhood. Trauma can be caused by events that are well-intentioned and necessary, such as those medical procedures that a person may be experiencing. Trauma can also be caused by an event that didn't happen to the person, but to a group that he or she identifies closely with, as in slavery or the Holocaust or the genocide of the Native American people. Over time, these chronic stressors can accumulate to cause trauma for an individual. So it's important for us to have a framework for our conversation on trauma. So you'll see on my screen that we have our pyramid. This pyramid is actually our ACE study. So the ACE study, or Adverse Childhood Experience Study, is research conducted by the Kaiser Permanente Health Maintenance Organization and the Center for Disease and Control and Prevention. Participants were recruited to the study between the years of 1995 and 1997 and have been in long-term follow-up for health outcomes. 17,000 patients undergoing physical exam provided detailed information about childhood experiences of abuse, neglect, and family dysfunction. The ACE study indicates that ACEs underlie so many issues that manifest later in life for us. Adverse childhood experiences are the most basic and long-lasting cause of health risk behaviors, mental health illnesses, social malfunction, disease, disability, death, and healthcare cost. You'll notice that the pyramid that we see, it kind of goes from a bottom-up approach. So we have our adverse childhood experiences, which disrupt or can disrupt the neurological development for an individual, which can cause social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. The adoption of healthy risk behaviors, which could potentially lead to disease, disability, and social problems, which then in turn could result in an early death for folks. So what is our ACE study? So you'll notice on my screen, once it progresses here, that there are 3 columns on my screen. The first 2 areas are going to be more individual experiences versus that last area, the third area that focuses on the family or care unit. This is the first time that a study expanded into that household dysfunction. It goes beyond just those individual characteristics. Results indicated that there were 10 common adverse experiences grouped into 3 general categories: recurrent and severe physical abuse, recurrent and severe emotional abuse, and sexual abuse. We also have growing up in a household with alcohol or drug user, members being imprisoned, mentally ill, chronically depressed, or institutionalized member, separation or divorce, mother being treated violently, both biological parents absent, emotional or physical abuse. And there are some things missing from our ACE study that Dr. Bobby Beal here in Ohio identified. So those things that would be missing are school and community violence, disasters and accidents, invasive or prolonged medical procedures, discrimination and oppression, poverty, and some other things that we want to consider with this ACE study. The difference between a big T trauma, which would be a large event such as a tornado or a hurricane, and those little T traumas that can happen for an individual or to an individual, such as, again, physical abuse, sexual abuse. Little T trauma is defined that there is no end in sight for the victim. Another consideration is what fires together wires together: overinterpretation, punishment and shame, and we need to consider 4 or more adverse experiences that the individual might experience. So when we have these ACEs present in our life, it puts us at a higher level of significant risk for health issues, in addition to some behavioral related issues. So behaviors would be lack of physical activity. We see an increase in smoking, alcoholism, drug usage. We also see an increase in missed work and school from folks that have been impacted by trauma. Physical and mental, we see severe obesity, diabetes, depression. We see an increase in suicide attempts, STDs or STIs, heart disease, cancer, stroke, COPD, and broken bones. The correlation between increased ACE scores and the impact on those behaviors and physical and mental health of an individual also increases. increase in risk of suicide, smoking, and drug use, and those mental health challenges cannot be stated heavily enough, as it does directly impact and increase the usage amounts across our society. While a higher number of ACEs may result in a higher likelihood to engage in health risk behaviors, risk is not destiny. So we have an opportunity to really do some great things in our communities to alleviate the reoccurrence of traumatic situations for folks. So at birth, the human brain is underdeveloped. Not all of the brain's areas are organized and fully functional. During childhood, the brain matures and the whole set of brain-related capabilities develop in sequence. For example, we crawl before we walk, we babble before we talk. The brain has a bottom-up organization, the process of sequential development of the brain, and is guided by our personal experiences. The brainstem will develop first, controlling the most basic functions of respiration, heart rate, and our blood pressure regulation. The midbrain develops next and regulates our response to danger and safety. This is our survival instinct, our amygdala. It's where our fight, flight, and freeze is located. The limbic system regulates our feelings and emotions, while the cortex is going to manage those executive functions like reasoning and planning. That cortex is not fully developed until approximately age 25, 26. So again, the prefrontal cortex, the area of our brains that help us use that logic, make decisions, and solve problems, is not fully developed until age 25, 26. And if we experience trauma, that prefrontal cortex can have delays in how it develops. In a situation where our amygdalas are firing, when we feel scared, under threat, or overwhelmed, our amygdalas are in charge. They are constantly looking for safety and escape, a way to make sure that we survive. So again, that fight, flight, and freeze. So when a young person is experiencing trauma or something that reminds them of a trauma, they are scared, overwhelmed, or may even feel threatened. They have that double whammy, an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex plus an amygdala that has completely taken over. Their underdeveloped prefrontal cortex makes it even harder to engage in that part of the brain to come online and start reasoning and thinking a situation through. So I want you to kind of think of this as that roadway, as Dr. Beal states it. So we have our input, we receive information, we observe, we interpret that information, we process that information, evaluate our options, we plan, and then we respond. For a person that has experienced trauma, they may receive an input, that alarm system takes over, that fight, flight, or freeze, and that could look like impulsiveness, aggression, and then we see the reaction. So it goes straight from input to reaction oftentimes. And then those of us that are working in communities sometimes see those behaviors, right? And we want them to stop, but we're going to learn that those behaviors can be beneficial for us because at least it's something for us to go on so that we can work towards creating that trauma-informed care approach. The effect of trauma on an individual can be conceptualized as a normal response to an abnormal situation. Often describe responses to trauma as abnormal, which in fact is an extremely normal response to a traumatic event. Understanding meaning behavior, so what has the individual experienced, will really be key in helping us to create that trauma-informed approach. It's also important for us to note that not all events are traumatic. Many people who experience a traumatic event will likely go on and live very satisfying lives. Many of us have resiliency and protective factors in our lives. Others may have difficulty and experience traumatic stress reactions. I'm going to pause here so you all can read this. So the effect on trauma on the individual, again, just keep in mind that it is a normal response to that very abnormal situation that's being experienced for the individual. In recent years, research, training, and information have helped build awareness about the impact of trauma on the lives of children. Excuse me. The awareness has resulted in a new understanding about the importance of addressing existing trauma exposure and preventing re-traumatization for folks. The leadership in federal, state, and local child serving systems, including child welfare, mental health, juvenile justice, education, primary care, Medicaid, and others, has recognized the urgency of changing the fundamental question from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. The challenge then becomes to ensure this paradigm shift permeates all levels of child serving systems and is disseminated to all individuals who touch the lives of children, from the policymaker at the state level to the receptionist at the local provider agency. So you'll see on my screen, there's some statistics here for you to review. And when we have that exposure to traumatic events, it greatly increases the likelihood that children will eventually receive behavioral health and social services. These statistics are so high that many social service settings assume that every child they see may have had some form of trauma in their background, whether anyone knows about it or not. So trauma-informed care means a framework for understanding, recognizing, responding to the effects of all types of trauma. It emphasizes the safety, physical, psychological, and emotional for all people, and helps survivors rebuild that sense of control and empowerment. Like standard precautions, which assumes that all body fluids, as if they are infectious, trauma-informed care means that programming, policies, procedures, and organizational practices are designed in a way that assumes that all have experienced a form of trauma. So becoming trauma-informed instead of what's wrong with you, how about what happened to you? Or instead of how did you feel, you can use how did you react? So it's just a different way of stating what we're seeing. So we're not making those assumptions about a person's character traits. Rather, we're trying to get to the root causes of why we're seeing the behavior that we're seeing. So it's important for us to realize, again, that all behavior has meaning. Symptoms are adaptations or survival skills. We build on success and not deficits of the individual, and prevention is far more impactful than intervention. This shift in process or shift in thinking is not an event, but a process for us, meaning that it's going to take practice. There's a lot of work that we need to do in order to create that trauma-informed care that individuals need and deserve to have. So now that we understand a little about trauma, we're going to talk about some practical ways to make our program trauma-informed. We're going to talk about children's behavior, recognizing the causes, warning signs, and identifying skills that increase and decrease in an emotional crisis. We'll talk about building positive relationships and how to adjust the environment to accommodate someone who may be having a difficult day. We'll also talk about how to create a culture in your program of safety and understanding. And finally, we're going to talk about distress tolerance skills. But before we do, we first want to acknowledge that behavior is neither bad nor good. It is something that can be seen and observed. Behavior always has a purpose, and it's our job to figure out what that purpose is. Perhaps we've experienced or had an experience with someone who behaves a certain way, and others have said she or he just does that for attention. But that behavior is actually fulfilling a purpose, right? The person wants attention, so they behave in a way that's going to get that for them. It may be adaptive behavior, meaning that it's positive and useful, like studying hard to get good grades and be recognized as valedictorian, or it might be maladaptive, which would be negative or non-productive behavior, like spending more time partying and socializing to become popular. Again, neither behavior is good or bad, but one is more productive than the other. Behavior always has a purpose and communicates something, but too often we don't consider those external factors that may be involved. Instead, we assume that it's the person's character traits, personality, or their disposition that causes their behavior. In social psychology, this is called the fundamental attribution error, and it means that we judge too quickly. So we're going to break apart our little flower here. We're going to look at psychological, physiological things that we can adapt, environmental, intrapersonal, and we'll again address trauma. So physiological consists of pain, hunger, thirst, discomfort, mental health, allergic reactions, medical needs, fatigue, and nausea. Physiological causes are the things that happen in our bodies, including our brain chemistry and our mental health. How we feel physically and mentally can affect how we act and behave. So for example, or an easy thing that we can do to start that trauma-informed care would just be providing food and nourishment for folks that are joining our groups. Sometimes we can promote getting a good night's sleep to have a less likelihood of that fatigue that might exist in our classrooms. So these sometimes can be those easy starting places for us to begin our trauma-informed approach. We also have environmental, so noise of our rooms, temperature of our rooms, the lighting in our space, crowding, and those space limitations can impact an individual in our programming. We have our inter and intrapersonal. Interpersonal refers to the relationship or actions that take place between two or more people, while intrapersonal refers to things that go on exclusively within one person. Intrapersonal causes of behavior may include things like personality, beliefs, emotions, skill limitations, agitation, confusion, and or frustration as a result of communication challenges, not understanding social cues, difficulty organizing information, difficulty in understanding and expressing language, and not being able to organize and apply information from previous experiences. Also, repeated incidents of failure can be that intrapersonal causes of our behavior that we may see. The occurrence of childhood trauma can impact the development of brain capacity and size. When neglect is combined with trauma, a child's brain develops in that survival style, so meaning that fight, flight, and freeze takes over to help keep him or her safe. This may result in a person being wired for survival, being impulsive, anxious, acting from instinct instead of reason, and not being able to understand or identify his or her feelings easily. The brain of a child who has been maltreated may develop in such a way that is adaptive for the child's negative behavior, but maladaptive for those positive environments. So again, imagine a young person in their home environment that maybe has food insecurities. We might see hoarding, and that it would be an adaptive behavior for that home environment. But when we see that young person take that into the school environment, it becomes maladaptive for that environment. The fundamental attribution error is the #1 mistake people make when looking at someone else's behavior, but we can avoid it. As we've seen, behavior has more to do with situational circumstances than the character or personality traits of the individuals that we serve. While these do influence what we do and how we act, sometimes they are not the only things that cause our behavior. Our role in supporting people is to figure out what a behavior is trying to communicate to us. But often, before we can do that, we have to look deeper and understand what its cause is. Often crisis or distress come out of very strong emotions, whether it be sadness, happiness, discomfort, or anger. These are the 3 characteristics of a crisis. The unusual balance between thinking and emotions is disturbed. The the usual coping mechanisms that the individual has fail, or there is evidence of impairment in the individual or group involved in the crisis. Each of us might define crisis in a very different way, but a crisis is the perception of the person and it is very real to them. We must use our tools to help the person through their crisis, even if it does not seem like a crisis to us. To do this, we must think about the meaning of crisis or behavior and not just focus on the intensity of the behaviors that we're seeing. We don't always know what the crisis is about, and many people may not be able to express themselves or communicate clearly with us. So often we're only left with the behavior to go on. We often only respond to that behavior though. We try to get it to stop. Ideally, we should be responding to the turmoil or the root cause of the crisis and the reason behind the behavior we're seeing. If we do that, we can help the person to regulate their own behavior rather than try to control that behavior. Some things that can increase in a crisis are increased fear, anger, frustration, energy, anxiety, heart rate, blood pressure, and sweating. Some things that decrease in a crisis for some folks would be concentrating, reasoning, attention span, coping skills, problem solving, communication, listening, and comprehension. So especially this is true if we're trying to throw a lot of information at folks when they're in a crisis situation, when that fight, flight, and freeze is taken over for them, they may not be able to process that information in that prefrontal cortex, that underdeveloped area of the brain for our young people. So we can prevent some of these things by teaching coping skills, teaching problem solving skills, and reminding folks of those skills that they're acquiring when those crisis situations occur. Again, when we try to teach children to think before they act, we are asking them to use one part of their brain to help them access and control what another part of the brain wants to do out of instinct. So there are 5 fundamental must-haves for us. The 5 fundamental must-haves, whether we are experiencing a crisis or not, again, these are 5 fundamental must-haves that we all need. Even on a good day, we want others to be patient with us, to have a positive attitude, and to try to understand us. So what do each of these areas look like in practice? We want to take time to get to know the person, to listen and understand them. It takes time to build a relationship and trust. So we want to be patient, consistent, and we don't want to give up. People with trauma in their history may have delays in their mental processing time. So we want to allow them time to receive information, to process that information, and respond how they want to respond to us. So again, that silence or that time allows for that processing time, processing in what they want to share and exactly how they want to share it with us. They may hear and understand the first thing that we said, but not the other things that followed. So when we speak, we want to slow down and be calm. We want to speak clearly and give them, again, time to process what we've said and form a response. They may have difficulty getting the words they want to say out as quickly as we are used to having. So we want to, again, be patient during this process. When we think of our space, we mean that physical space around us, our personal bubble. This is the area in which we feel uncomfortable. We usually will lean away from the other person, get up and move to another area, or just walk away. So I want you to think about how you feel when you're upset. Perhaps you're angry, irritated, or frustrated. Now someone comes up to you and puts their arms around your shoulders. Are all of us receptive to this? Does this make us feel better, or does it make some of us feel more angry, irritated, and frustrated? For someone who has experienced a trauma such as physical or sexual abuse, their personal bubble might be quite large. Anyone getting into that comfort zone could trigger that fight, flight, or freeze response. Our third fundamental must-have is positive tone and words. We may be the decisive element in whether a person has a good day or a bad day. It's our personal approach that creates the climate. It's our daily mood that makes the weather. We possess a tremendous amount of power to make an individual's life miserable or joyous. We can be the tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration for folks. We can humiliate or humor or hurt or heal. In all situations, it is our response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated and an individual humanized or dehumanized. We are a change agent, whether we like it or not. It's not a question of will we affect the individual, but how we will affect the individual. Our verbal and nonverbal behaviors should be positive. Our response and interactions should be determined by the needs of the individual, so we're meeting the person where they are. And it's not based on habit or upon our needs. We may need to do the opposite of what we always do or what we feel like doing. Our response to situations that can be upsetting make a difference. So again, we want to be calm, cool, and unemotional and not angry, upset, or emotional. Remain objective and impersonal, so we're not going to take things personally. We're not going to be confrontational. We're going to let the individual save face. And if we can't say something positive, we're not saying it. Our response should make the situation better, not worse. We also want to be aware of our body language, so those facial expressions, and mindful of our tone of voice and the emphasis that we place on certain words. We want to offer kind words and smiles, and one way we can accomplish a positive tone is to practice empathy and understanding. Again, I did a shout out to Brené Brown, where she has that phenomenal video on the power of empathy. So we're going to try to imagine living in another person's shoes. Where are they coming from emotionally? What might make them more worried about the situation? How would I want to be treated if I were feeling the same way? If someone needed to address an issue with me, would I want them to do it in front of my friends, my roommates, or my coworkers, or would I want them to talk to me discreetly or privately? What tone of voice would I want them to have? Being connected, having positive relationships with others goes a long way to help us have a good life. Having people in our lives who not only know us, but understand us makes us feel more connected, like we're not alone on our life's journey. So how we do this in practice, when we are connecting to another person, we are present in that or checking our email, but we're really dedicating the time that is deserved and needed by this individual in front of us. I want you to think about your oldest friend, the person that you have known the longest. They know you, right? They know your good stuff and your bad stuff, but your conversations, experiences, and relationship together is not just about the facts of your past. What keeps your friend is your connection. Perhaps you live far away from each other, or you have family lives that kind of pull you away from each other, and we don't get to spend as much time as we used to. But when we get together, what is it like? Do we pick up right where we left off? Or do we have to spend time getting to know each other again? Usually no. Usually we already know them. We have those foundations. We have those bricks. But we do reconnect and add more cement to our relationship. Another thing that I wanted to mention on this screen, so we have our 5 fundamental must-haves, but I also want to mention building resiliency, the 4 C's. And building that resiliency for folks can be extremely beneficial for individuals that have been impacted by trauma. So our first C is control, where we are establishing safety, agency, choice, and voice. Our second C is contribution, which includes responsibilities, chores, tasks, doing things for the greater good. Connection is our third C, where we have social peers, social skills, and we're teaching people those buffer skills. And our fourth C is competency, which includes co-regulation, problem-solving skills, abilities, and talents. We want to increase protective factors and decrease risk factors. And a way to increase those protective factors is to build those 4Cs resiliency. There are 4 elements of empathy outlined in Brene Brown's video, and we'll see them, or we see them here on our screen. So things that we can do is we want to try to see the world the way that they see the world. We want to try to understand their reality. We want to appreciate their humanness and put no judgments on what they say, do, or feel. We want to try to understand how they feel, so we try to put ourselves in their shoes. And we communicate this understanding through the words and actions that we demonstrate. These are our 4 elements of empathy. So as many of us know, sometimes another way for us to create a trauma-informed care approach is to use our environment, as some of our stressors are partially a result of the environment around the individual. So again, it can be a good first start for any intervention is just to adjust that environment to reduce those stressors. Again, this can sometimes be the quickest way for us to de-escalate a situation. So how we use our environment, first, we could focus in or hone in on prevention, where we enrich the environment to meet individual needs, reduce the boredom, loneliness, or fatigue. Enriching the environment may also include making sure that there's enough space, supplies, and materials so that the individuals do not have to fight for access for those things. Intervention, where we review and rearrange our environment, including people and sometimes objects, so we can reduce noise and distractions, we can adjust our lighting, we can accommodate the temperature and the ventilation, we can regulate space and sequence of our activities, we can change the location of peers, we can organize furniture and seating arrangements to facilitate an individual's choices, preferences, and the need for personal space. So you've heard me mention prevention and you've heard me mention intervention. So I'm going to pop this next slide here up so that we have a little better of understanding of the difference between the two. Prevention means we're trying to avoid or prevent a harmful outcome because of a crisis or a behavior. Again, there are many things that we can do to help prevent crisis, such as avoiding confrontation or avoiding power trips and power struggles. We can give people the space and time so we're not crowding them or making too many demands upon their attention. Intervention means saying or doing something with a specific intention of helping someone avoid harmful outcomes. This is intentional. We have thought it out. We have a specific reason and a specific result that we are focused on achieving. We are intervening on purpose. This may be to interrupt someone if they start to verbalize a thought process that we know will lead to that obsessiveness, or it may be to step in during an argument with another individual to de-escalate the situation. I keep wanting to ask, are there any questions? But I know you are all muted. So we will definitely get to those questions, comments, and concerns at the end of our presentation. Some additional things that I do want to mention on our prevention and intervention, we do want to know the least aversive option for us, no limitations, both ours and theirs. We want to diffuse the situation calmly and not add to the emotions, prevent injury and emotional harm, and provide alternative choices to individuals. So our perspective is key role in how we set the culture of our programs. Are we focused on solutions and positive outcomes, or are we only focused on the problems? To understand what it means to be focused on solutions and not problems, think of the spotlight and a floodlight. A floodlight can have a beam spread of up to 120 degrees. It can illuminate a larger amount of space with the same output as the spotlight. So we really want to focus on those solutions, success, relationships, and our opportunities. Again, that floodlight gives us that higher beam so that we can observe the environment and adjust or prevent or intervene when necessary. So I promised we would talk about distress tolerance skills today as well. To help you understand distress tolerance skills, imagine each person is a glass of water. Each glass is uniform, holding the exact same amount of liquid. And each glass is sitting under a faucet that is pouring water out at the exact same rate. Next, imagine that my glass of water starts with more water in it than any of the other glasses. Given this situation, even though my glass is being filled at the same rate with the same amount of water, mine will overflow more quickly than the other glasses. In this metaphor, my glass has low distress tolerance. When an individual has that low distress tolerance, it's not that he or she is experiencing more powerful emotions or more frequent negative emotions or even more confusing emotions. The issue is simply that what does not feel overwhelming to others feels very overwhelming to him or her. His glass already has more water in it, so it takes less for it to overflow. Research shows us that with support, trauma can be overcome, but many people go without support. The idea is that we don't have to solve this all at once or all by ourselves. In this moment, we just have to survive. And we have to teach others that they have the ability to survive this moment also. So on my screen, you'll see some healthy coping strategies that we can connect folks to. We have meditation or prayer, time, exercise, friendships, hobbies, how to manage emotions. And some of this does require some education and skill set that we can teach folks so that they can better cope in these high stressful times. I always like to leave folks with some additional information as well. So our shift in thinking, the 4 R's, evidence of a trauma-informed approach, we want to realize the widespread impact of trauma and understand potential paths for recovery. We want to recognize signs and symptoms of trauma in our clients, our families, our staff, and others involved with our systems and in our communities. We want to respond by fully integrating knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, and our practices. And we want to resist re-traumatizing folks in our environments. Another way that we can do this is through SAMHSA's 6 key principles of a trauma-informed approach: to establish safety, to establish trustworthiness and transparency, to establish peer support, to establish collaboration and mutuality, to empower individuals and their voice and their choice. And we want to be considerate of those cultural, historical, and gender issues that may exist for an individual. And last but certainly not least, I do want to give you the ABCDE, a great way for us to, again, be implementing those trauma-informed approaches. This is, again, the work of Dr. Bobby Beal here in the state of Ohio. So we can ask what the problem is. So our A is ask what the problem is. B, we're brainstorming solutions together. Notice that keyword of together. I'm not doing something to or for someone, but rather I want them to be successful when they leave me and my group. And when I teach them, when we can brainstorm those solutions together, they're gaining a skill set. C, we want to choose one. D, we want to do it. And E, we want to evaluate whether it worked. Again, all of this is done with an individual, not to or for someone. So again, we can ask what the problem is, brainstorm solutions, choose one, do it, and evaluate to see if it worked. You can find additional information on trauma-informed care by visiting Ohio MOSS website. So that's mha.ohio.gov. You can also find additional information through the creator of this program, Montgomery County Adams Board here in Ohio. This presentation is typically about a 2.5 hour training full of engaging activities, but we did scale that down for you to be able to see it in this hour time slot today. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can take some questions and Samantha can share some additional information with you.
Yes, just a disclaimer. I think there was some confusion with the previous slide. If you would like a participation letter, you just have to do the survey. There's a QR code at the end that we'll display. And then also I just put the link in the chat as well, just to prevent any confusion. And then some of the other questions I received before we get into more questions is where they could find the slide and the recording. There is a part of the website under CACA's Wednesday webinars. That's where you'll be able to find the recording, the presentation, and even previous webinars. I think I put that in the chat as well earlier, but I could copy and paste that again. The last few things, I just want to go over two things. I'll display the QR code and then we can start with some questions. So let me share my screen now. Can everyone see my screen? Yeah, okay. So just a reminder, in 2 weeks, we're gonna have our forum at the Gaylord right outside of DC. Amanda will actually be presenting there again, 2 times, right, Amanda? Yep. I know many of you are aware of this. We have this once a year. We have over 90 presentations. We have a prevention day. So I just wanted to put that on everyone's radar. If you have any questions, I'll leave my email in the chat as well, and you can reach out to me, but this is one of our biggest events of the year. Another thing, I wanted to go over our membership. So if you're interested in becoming a CACA member, you get access to the CACA community. That's honestly my favorite. You get up-to-date alerts on legislative processes. There's some training discounts, especially when it comes to some other events, like I mentioned one earlier. This is some of our handles. I know some of you are familiar or already following us, but especially our Instagram and our TikTok. Which I need to put on there too. We are very active in giving updates on whether it be legislative, newsworthy, or just fun updates in general of what CACA is doing. And then the last slide before we get into questions is the QR code. So if you want to just, everyone I think is mostly familiar with these, you bring up your camera and you could do the survey. So you should auto generate the participation letter when you're done this survey. If not, you could reach out to me. You should have my email from the alerts, but I'll also put it in the chat. So I'm going to start with questions. How do you sign up for Prevention Day only? It actually goes along with forum. Like it's not its individual own sign up. You sign up for forum and it's part of the week's events. Is there any other questions for me or for Amanda? And I could also, John, I think I just answered yours. Anyone else, you could type into the chat box or you could raise your hand.
We'll just add, so for my sessions at CADCA, we will be doing yoga and mindfulness. So send your young people my way. Teach them some healthy coping strategies.
And Amanda, you shared your email too. So if people have questions, I know you mentioned some resources. I forget the video you mentioned. That was I know a strong resource, or any questions that's available too.
Most of the content that was shared today would be from Dr. Bobby Beal. We also have SAMHSA, obviously, and then Dr. Bruce Perry also contributed to the content as well for Montgomery County.
Catherine, I can't send in the chat, but if you want to just email me and I could send it to you that way, I have to upload it and everything and make sure it includes all our updates and comments. But again, that'll be on the CACA website, our recording and the presentation. Hopefully, I usually try to get it up by Friday at the latest. So Let me stop sharing so I can answer some Q&A. Okay. So a CEU, how do we get a CEU? You'll get a certificate of participation from this. And again, just completing the survey, I put the link in the chat where you can reach out to me, but once you complete the survey, you'll get your participation letter. Another question, and this may be more for you, Amanda, could we find more information about the A, B, C, D, and E chart you mentioned?
That information actually was contributed by Dr. Bobby Beal here in Ohio. Let me see here. Oh, bear with me here. So Dr. Bobby Beal does a lot of trauma-informed care presentations throughout Ohio. She kindly gifted us with that information on how to actually simplify the process and make it a little bit more user-friendly for some of us. Trauma-informed care is hard work. We're really changing a lot of things in that work. So I would definitely reach out to her. Again, I'll put my email in the chat box. I can definitely connect her to you if you would like additional information on her ABCD. And I have just placed that in the chat box for you all.
Before we close out for the day, is there any other additional questions for myself or Amanda? I'm looking at the chat and I'm looking at the Q&A box. Oh,
Thank you.
okay.
It looks like we maybe have does John have a question? I see his hands raised.
John, did you have a question?
Yes. I used to work at a juvenile facility, and I worked with 13 to 16-year-olds. Now, some of these were perpetrators of violence, but they were forced into it by where they lived in the gang in the neighborhood, and it seemed like they were traumatized, forced into it. Do you guys see that often?
Actually, yes, with ACEs, you're a higher likelihood the more ACEs that we have, we become more vulnerable to being not only the victim, but also the perpetrator of violence. And there's quite a bit of information on that ACE study on SAMHSA's website for you to take a look at how that kind of can span out and cause some additional behavioral health related issues in our communities.
I just wanted to say hello to Miley Murray in Kauai.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. Before we end for the day, any other questions in the chat box, Q&A box, or you could even raise your hand? Okay, seeing none, I just want to thank you, Amanda. I know you had to condense a lot, so I really appreciate it. It was jam-packed and I learned a lot myself, and I'm excited to see you at Forum. Everyone, thank you for attending, and please reach out to us if you have any follow-up questions. Thank you so much for attending.